And so as I was saying, on the plane of consistency, the subject disappears back into the collectivity, and this is the point of view that D&G are privileging. It's a little bit like looking back at Gebser, where Gebser had talked about with the mental consciousness structure, it was all about the stabilization of the ego and the self and the individual from out of the tribal and the collective. But now, of course, as McLuhan foresaw, and he saw this, I think, before D&G did, that we are reversing. We're going back into a tribal modality. And McLuhan saw that the source of this retribalization of modern man was indeed the result of a shift in media from the Gutenbergian traditional printed media to the electronic media, which shift in favor of collectivity and tribalism, the global village. The village is itself a tribal image, and the breakdown and fragmentation of society into multiple tribes. I think then, in a certain sense, the elimination of the subject in D&G by shifting back onto the plane of consistency with multiplicities and multitudes of tribes is a kind of reversal of Gebser's idea. But it is, whether it's a reversal or not, it is consistent with what is happening and has been happening in the world after World War II. And it's not a world that's consistent with Gebser at all. He's dealing only with the cultural elite on the plane of organization and hierarchy, and that's all that interests him. Whereas D&G are much more sympathetic to popular culture and the world of the masses and so forth. And so, note that Alain Badiou, on the other hand, is trying to retrieve and preserve the subject, whereas D&G are getting rid of him. He actually uses or departs, traces a line of flight, I suppose you could say, from Difference in Repetition, where Deleuze had discussed the third synthesis of time, the empty synthesis of time, in which the novelty emerges, the new thing emerges and blows apart the subject. And produces the man without qualities. The sense of identity is shattered in a Nietzschean sense with the impact of the new. This idea of the new, the novelty, the singularity, the event, Badiou borrows from Difference in Repetition and uses it to create and retrieve the subject in contradistinction to what D&G are doing in their work in eliminating the subject by saying that the event subjectivizes. It creates the subject through fidelity, a subject's fidelity to a truth event, whether the truth event is Marxism or Einsteinian physics or a religion. It doesn't matter what it is, but the fidelity to the truth event creates and captures the subject. So Badiou and also Zizek, who agree with him in this, represent a later phase of postmodernity that tries to recapture the subject and retrieve and preserve him, whereas Deleuze and Guattari are eliminating him back into the tribal ground of multitudes and multiplicities. And I think to criticize D&G's work, to just dismiss it as mere left-wing propaganda, is to miss the point, to say the least, of what they're doing here. What they're doing is creating a modern-day cosmology, whether it's postmodern, whether it's left-wing or not, doesn't matter. They're creating a cosmology with a system of concepts and ideas. I mean, it's not a system, it's asystematic. But it's a collection of concepts, images, and ideas that really do capture what has happened in our civilization since World War II. The breakdown into tribalism, the multi-egoic personality, whether we're talking about the celebrity or the schizophrenic or the artist's schizophrenic vision in David Cronenberg, or in the paintings and artwork of H.R. Giger. These are all schizophrenic ways of looking at the world in terms of multiplicities, fragmented unities, where unities no longer exist and multiplicity has come in to displace the idea of a molar aggregate or a molar unity. So we have this opposition then on the plane of consistency versus the plane of organization. On the plane of organization we have arborescent macro multiplicities, whereas on the plane of consistency we have rhizomatic micro multiplicities. So that's the basic dichotomy that they have, that they've set up here. And I think it's an interesting model, and it has all kinds of applications to other areas than just politics. It certainly is amenable to applying itself politically to phenomena like the Arab Spring and revolution and revolt and Occupy Wall Street and all of that. It is very applicable to that. But it's also applicable to other phenomena that are in fact taking place. The internet, for example, is a rhizome. It was developed and designed as a rhizome deliberately by the military. A rhizome is something such that it's an organization of multiplicities, although I shouldn't use the word organization. It's an assemblage of multiplicities that are linked in such a way that if you do damage to any one part of it, the rest of it simply reconfigures itself, like an ant hive that you try to damage and it continues to reconfigure itself. This is why rhizomes are so tough. Why barbarians in history, civilizations can never get rid of them, because they're rhizomes. Same thing with the internet. It was deliberately designed not to have a center that could be wiped out so that the whole thing would collapse. It's a rhizome. If you destroy one part of it, the rest of it takes up the slack. So we have this phenomenon of electronic redundancy that's part of the electrotopic world that we're living in now, that is fundamentally networked and rhizomatic. So that's only one application of D&G's ideas, tribalism. Another application, of course, the internet, and then the multi-egoic personality. Their stuff is quite consistent with what's going on, I think. So whether you're right or left, I don't think it matters. The applications of the ideas do capture and correspond to what is happening on the planet and has been happening since they wrote this book several decades ago. So that's the upshot of the second chapter. And in the next chapter on the geology of morals, it's a sort of a book unto itself. It's a huge chapter with a huge cosmology about strata and how strata emerge on the plane of organization, and how the strata work with double articulations of form and content at each level. So we'll look at that one next.